Okay, everybody. And if you turn out that you can't hear me, you think, even with a gentle voice, you'll be able to hear me? Yeah.
There's a sound I can turn on.
That's on? Then. Okay, so I'm saying open tovish. And in Coast Miwoks, it means, how are you? It's a standard greeting. If you're great, you say, ka tovish. I don't know what you say if you're not great. But open tovish, everybody. Carol did the introduction. It'll be a time travel, basically. So we'll be visiting the land of the Coast Miwoks pre-1776, which was the time when the Spaniards arrived to Richentos Bay and dropped the anchor there. And from then on, everything changed. So it's before and after. So this is before. So you're here in the church. You can have to feel the ground on your feet or your bum or whatever. And once upon a time, just like now, we will be in a redwood grove. It would be different because at that time no one had logged it. The mother trees would have been huge. And you'll notice something that you don't notice now. It is so quiet. It's so quiet that basically these days no modern human can actually experience. But you can actually hear the sound of the creek. It's rushing. It's been raining. So you wonder what's there. We're in a canyon. The redwoods are basically growing around the creek in the base of the canyon. And you follow the creek and you find you're not quite alone because the grizzly bear is there, the honey for the coho. In the old days, the coho salmons would run totally freely without any hindrance. And actually, the Coast Miwoks often did not go to the redwoods much. Because basically say, they are full of grizzlies. And actually, I checked the books. Yes, redwoods are popular with bears of any kind. So maybe you should mosey back. But sometime you might actually hear voices from down there because they did either cross over or every spring, all the creeks would be set with these special cone-shaped fish traps. So they would have to come and basically tend to the traps and take the fish and set it again. Sometimes they also go, smoke! That's a familiar one to us now. And you hear the human voices again. We have found out, the knowledge was lost for a while, that they basically did control burnings of the redwoods too, not just the grasslands. And when it's such a low fuel load, it does not hurt the redwoods. It doesn't get really hot. So step out of the redwoods and you look to the hills, and the hills talking about would be the one up there. There'll be more redwoods on that side here, and you see what seem like endless grasslands with spread out oaks. The funny thing is that you realize the grass looks different. It sort of looks tufty. And if you look at it in the summer and the fall, there are no golden hills of California. These are the native annual grasses that do not turn gold in the fall. The golden is because of annual grasses coming later that die and look golden. In the fall, you may also go to scent of smoke from the grasslands. And you're now sort of catching on to that indigenous people did a very subtle but also very effective land management. It looks like wilderness, and people that came and saw it thought it was, but it really was not. They had carefully tended the land to the best for the land and themselves. Only experienced elders were allowed to start those fires. This, of course, is not from our Mill Valley grasslands there, but I thought it was a lovely drawing up of an indigenous person doing a controlled fire. It basically improves conditions for very important food items. So they're basically tending the fields there, like wildflower seeds and even the quality of acorns.
You wonder how they were able to control the fire.
They knew how. They fine-tuned it over 1,000 of years. I'm sure sometimes there was a big fire, but basically if you keep it going steadily, don't leave it pile up. So in the summer, you would hear maybe the women up in the fields. This is a Pomo Indian, but there will be the same equipment. You go out in the field with a basket and a beater, and you basically collect the grass seeds and wildflower seeds, the one that the burning really made excellent conditions for. And you take them home and you grind them up, and you have seed cakes. They're supposed to be very, very tasty. The same also goes for bulbs that you would dig up with digging poker. That's why I often later heard diggers by the Indians. It's because that was an important tool. If you look up, if you got the sky, you may see condors here. The condor was a very important bird for the Miwoks. It was sacred to them. And so was the golden eagle. And you may also, and present-day Miwoks even talk about that, and actually Harriet did too, when I showed this to her, that there was just clouds of migrating monarchs. So I'm wondering, am I making this up? Are there any contemporaries images of the landscape? This is almost contemporary. It's from 1816. It basically confirms what I was saying, that the hills are actually bare, the grasslands, some scattered oaks, and in the canyons, like we are here, that's where you have the trees. So the people you heard passing by several times here and setting fires, etc., where do they live? Do they live here? No, they do not. They visit, but they live somewhere else. They live down by the salt marsh, and I made a map here. I had to use a contemporary map to show. And on the square here shows where the church is. And this is down on Middle Avenue here in the, I guess it's Locust, Sycamore neighborhood. That's where the closest village would be. And we actually know the name of it. It was contemporary with this being written down. The name was Anamas. And it's a pattern that all around the bay, the villages were always placed where a creek empties into a marsh. And this is a drawing from the South Bay showing how extensive the marsh areas could be. You can see Thule elk and lots of birds, very, very rich environment. And that sort of answers the question, why there and not in the redwoods, and why not in the grassy hills? Basically, it's optimal food supply all year. The hunter-gatherers, they have to get food all year, and if they're here, they can go and visit up in the backcountry here. They can go hunting, get quail, get deer, etc. They can go to the mud flats and they get lots of mussels, clams, oysters, and a lot of birds. We see a drawing here often that we set out nets like that to catch the birds in it. And of course, there's fresh water there too. That's important. So combined, this diet is basically the perfect paleo diet. And the people, from the records we know, are actually very long-lived. And of course, they're also down here. They could travel by boat. They made tule boats, and this is also where they could get the tule, the reeds, to make the boats with. And basically, they could easily get around the bay. Even the Spaniards admitted that this was way better than their own boats. They could just get everywhere they wanted. I found it sort of nice that a priest mentioned that the people were always splashing around in water like amphibians. They were very, very comfortable in this coastal environment. So you get this idea, you like to visit the village. So you leave the redwoods and you follow some trails up in the hills. That's usually where the trails were. It was easy just going through the grasslands. So what do you see when you first show up? You see a huge shell mound. At an enormous one, when it was measured in 1909, it was still 20 feet high, 450 feet long, and 200 feet wide. And it is situated right at the marsh they always were. This is a postcard I found from 1909, and I actually think, because at this time the shell mound was here, that this may have been one of the shell mounds, because it's situated right where it's supposed to be. If it's not it would have been very much like it. But whereas the village itself, you see in the shell mound, so actually we're not entirely sure exactly where it would be. It could be on the top of the mound. It sort of seems weird, but it's in a very flat land. If you're on the top of the mound, you can actually see something. You can look at the marsh, you can see boats coming in, and so if the passages of water have changed, you can make plans for it. So it could have been there, but if it wasn't there, it was pretty close by. And if you look here for shell mounds, there were not just lookout places on the garbage heaps. There was also had ceremonial functions like burials. This is the bay here, and this is Mill Valley, and I put these two red spots on it. That was basically big shell mounds that were still visible here in 1909. And you can see how many there were. just around the bay. It may have looked somewhat like this. This is a reconstruction of an Olone, which would be on the other side, but it could look very much like this. So that might be your first look up from the hills, looking down. These were Thule houses, so they're made from the reeds, the same reeds that were made for the boats. And they were usually temporary and for short-term camping. You actually could make one in 2 hours, I read, if you knew how to do this. And usually they just torch them off. If they got fleas or mice, they just torch them off. But the Spaniards called anames for a rancheria, which meant that it actually was a substantial village. It wasn't a temporary anything like that. So it was probably looked more like that to fit maybe 30 to 60 villagers in it. The redwood was much more water resistant for in the winter. The Thule would just soak thing up, and it would last way longer too.
Is it the wood or the bark?
It is a bark. Supposedly they would find trunks at the coast, or they would find trunks in the woods, and they basically peel off the bark. Then they had a framework inside and laid it over that. And usually when you see reconstructions, they're sort of small like that, but it could be 20 feet wide. It all depended how many people you want to fit into it. And there are also some bigger houses that were sort of semi-underground. This is the communal house. That was very, very important for dances and rituals. I heard a present person, Miwoks, saying, we are very ceremonial people, and they always were. These dances could last for several days. That was very important in the religion, and often they were healing dances. There was also the sweat houses. This is what was being built, but it actually looks pretty much like that. It was mostly for the men, where they would sweat and prepare to go hunting. Often they would sleep there while they were purifying themselves to go hunting. So meeting the people, and I'm sort of making this up, but it's totally based on what the Spaniards said when they first came in and met people. Basically, they seem to be extremely friendly, very, very peaceful, no weapons around. They come and greet you. They seem very excited to see you. And then there's an apparent headman that steps in. Apparently, you must always make a speech. They're also very vocal speech people. And you brought water and those seed cakes you talked about. That is how the meetings usually always started. And it's interesting to finally get a look at what they would look like. As the Spaniards said, handsome, good presence, fine postures, good people. So I tried to find out to get contemporary drawings, and this is totally difficult to do. If it was not for the Russians, we were sent two ships over to explore, and ships in those days always had an artist on it. They didn't have photographers. So this is from one, and this is all from Bodega Bay. You can actually see the ship here. So this is inside one of those Thule houses. So you get a first look at the people. This is the guy. Interesting, he's not wearing any clothes. The women have a few clothes on it. It was not a very clothed people unless they felt cold. And you notice that the skin color on him is pretty dark, but the Russians said that they are very dark-skinned, but it's mostly because they spend so much time in the sun. And this is another guy from Bodega Bay. These are the only depictions we have of Coast Miwoks, basically. That's all that can be found. If you look at others, these are Olones. This one we saw before. But you see a similarity, dark-skinned. They used to have a head knot for the hair. And these are Miwoks from the South Bay. This is the only depiction we have of the whole Coast Miwoks. And basically, yeah, it's true. The men did not wear clothes unless they were cold. They went hunting naked. So unless they went into brushland, but had to put something over tender parts, this is what they look like. Now, I think they look pretty good. However, and the Spaniards had no negative things to say about their looks, but unfortunately, later British and American victims, they were totally turned off by these people. They felt almost disgusted by it. They felt they had negroid features, too dark-skinned, not enough noses. The Americans and British visitors that visited before then, just looking at these people, what the? It was not what they wanted to see. The Spaniards treated the indigenous people more like, they acknowledged them as people, while often the Brits and the Americans couldn't quite relate to them as people. So this is almost the end of the first part. So I sort of want to mention those relationships to the land. So we notice a very sophisticated land management that is very hard to recognize to people who don't know that is what's happening. They considered all living beings family and their spiritually connected to them. That was very, very important. And for example, they never cut down trees. They picked the redwood from the fallen logs somewhere for their houses. And when housing bulbs and seeds, they never, ever took the last one. It was whoever was being trained in this also, do not do that. Every kid knew they did not take everything. So who are these people? We call them Coast Miwoks. They are. It comes from the word Miwoks, that basically means people. And there may have been about 2,000 to 5,000 people in all. We're not talking about the millions of people we have now. And this is a map, and you see this is the triplets. This is the Wyman, and I've been told this pronunciation of what I called human for a while. This is the land here. There's a little overlap with something called Oguasto, but most of the people say it would be Wyman. And they lived in Marin and Sonoma County for 3,000 to 4,000 years, a very long time.
3,000 to 4,000?
Yeah, 3,000 to 4,000 years. Yeah, imagine that. Think of our own civilization. We come now, what happened after that. It's called the Mission Years, which I have named the Great Dying, because unfortunately that is what happened. It turned out to be an unintended genocide. The land was a province of New Spain, and partly also at the very end also of Mexico. Basically, the intent of the Spaniards and the patrons, they came for the souls, basically. They wanted to create thriving communities of Christianized Indians. But for the Miwoks, basically their lives, as they ever knew it, collapsed. You can look at the decline in population here let's go down here. Only 60 left.
A question from
where?
From the audience.
Oh, yes, the question?
Yeah, hi, Annie. Why was the spotted owl a harbinger?
I have no idea why they thought it was, but I heard many tales told from people said that if they saw a spotted owl, it was very bad. Something bad is going to happen very soon, and probably someone's going to die. As to why, I have no explanation. It is. It just is. And I want to point to that only 11% of the human from this area ever made it out of the missions. They died. So often people say, well, did they come voluntarily? And yes, they did. In hindsight, you say, what were you thinking? But of course, at that point, they could not have known that it would end so badly. Basically, it was the most exciting thing that happened in the culture in ages. It was such stable cultures that not much very new really arrived, and when they came, they were so excited. So basically, they wanted to be part of this new. They could go over to the missions, and maybe they can get metal tools and get a horse, and who knows, all the things they never knew. They had no idea at the moment they got baptized, they were prisoners, basically. They could not leave the missions again. If they tried to escape, the soldiers would come out and basically catch them and bring them back. And for serious punishment for having done this, don't do this again. Were the slaves then? Yes and no. There were slave-like conditions. They were worked very hard and under very harsh conditions, but they were not bought and sold. So it's a matter of definition of slavery. Businesses were just appalled by the conditions they were working on. And here you can see over the Presidio, here's a work detail, and a Spaniard on a horse guarding them. It was particularly hard for them to work so hard because they were hunter-gatherers, and that is not the agrarian lifestyle of getting up early and work all day, and then work all day, was simply not how it was harder for them than for others. It's often the reason they got punished so hard, because it's hard for them to stick to it. The idea was they would become proper Christians, and once they had become proper Christians and agricultural people, they would be citizens of Spain, and the land, it was held in trust, it was not taken, would be given back to them. That we know, of course, never happened. So why did they die in such large numbers? It's obvious to us that if you take two totally different people and put them together, that there's going to be an exchange of diseases. And on this particular exchange, it really hit the indigenous people hard, particularly small pox and measles. One epidemic killed a quarter of all the mission Indians in the San Francisco Bay Area. I know that the same thing happened in Mexico. You think the paddlers would have known, but they had no sense of contagion. So very crowded conditions. They didn't understand you don't put 350 women into a dormitory under very crowded conditions without something bad happening. Damp climate, insufficient food, there was never enough food, and many other stress factors. Unfortunately, when physically sick, of course, they tried to escape to go home to their family left in the villages, and then it was out. It was a cultural genocide. They did intend to do that because they meant basically to wipe everything of their culture out of them and make them Spaniards. They often were allowed to dance like this. This was in the mission in San Francisco. If somehow the priest thought there was not too un-Christian. But basically, all attendance was obligatory, and you got severely punished if you didn't do it. So it didn't end well. This was an image I looked at when I was going to show what people look like, but I couldn't do it because I looked and said, there's something wrong with these people. Yes, I can see their faces, etc., but they look horribly depressed. And everybody that came from Vancouver, the closest artist that actually drew this said, I have never seen one laugh. They look like they're not interested in anything. Because the Buddha said, a deep melancholy always clouds their faces. This was hard times. People died all the time. They couldn't escape. Hard work. I mean, this was not what they thought they signed up for. So at the end of the mission area, which was in the early 1830s, or there even any Marine Coast Miwoks left. There was some left in they made a San Rafael mission for sick people from San Francisco. There were a few still hanging around there. But basically, the entire countryside in Marin were basically depopulated. The diseases had basically done it. They were done. And it was not just Marin. If you follow the mission road from San Diego up to San Francisco and San Rafael, it was basically, there was no one there. They were dead. If you wanted to escape this, if you look at this line here from Bodega to Sacramento, north of this, that's where the Spaniards never came. People were still living very peaceful here, also in the high sea areas. So if you wanted to escape, you could try to go there, but that will not last long. So there were a few unbaptized free Miwoks that were still surviving, mostly in Tamales and Petaluma area. When I hear people knew these days, Coast Miwoks speak, they basically tell they are in the lineage from someone that lived in those places. Then Mexican, there was a war. This became Mexican. And this is where the legal land grab happened. The Mexican came for the land, basically. And they basically refined mission land from everything to just 1 mile around the missions. The rest were basically free for them to give to private people as property. And we got 2 land grants here, and there was some confusion about where the line went. But this was our land. Land here would belong to an English guy called William Richardson. So this was how the Mexican land grants went. Often even to the squares. It was a totally un-Miwok way of thinking. Basically, land ownership was totally unknown to the Coast Miwoks. They would understand having rights, use right, for example, to an excellent oak tree where the food was, or an excellent oyster bed. But you could not own the land. I mean, no. But this is what happened. And this is our 2 here, Sausalito and Corte Madera. So will they get at least some mission coast? Will they get any of this land back? And someone talked to them in mission in 1839 and basically complained there's so little land left. There was nowhere to go. They sort of looked at a few pieces where there were squatters, but it was not officially given away. They asked to give them to them, and it was denied. So no indigenous land grants were granted in this area. Only 2 were granted in Pirit, Ulaanbaatar. It was also later approved by Americans. And Nicasio, which was a much bigger area where they really could go, but that was turned down by the U.S. Land Commission later. So where did they go? No place to go. Basically, the survivors from the mission basically went to work on the ranches. And the conditions were exactly the same as they were in the missions. You work for food and shelter. And supposedly it was very rough. And diseases, still, the epidemic sort of came almost in circles. It just went on and on and on. So they died at double the rate of blacks on the plantations in the south. And Reed, famous Reed, with the mill down there, he decided to buy a mill for logging. And basically the builders, the loggers, and whoever built the mill and whoever milled the logs would basically have been indigenous people, coast Miwoks probably. It was the only workforce that was around. And the hills turned into open cattle range, and possibly also the ranch crew was probably also Indian. The men were trained at the mission to be vaqueros, or however that is pronounced. So that's where they were. When we come to the American period, they came not for souls, they came for the land and its resources. There's sort of an ominous drawing there. First happened the gold rush, a couple of years. There's not any particularly new laws, but this is where things really shift from where it has been during Spanish and mission rule. And it's actually estimated, among all the people rushing to the hills to get gold, that about half or initially of the people who did the manual work were actually indigenous people, very possibly some from this area here to do the hard work. Again, same conditions. You work for some food and some shelter, a tent somewhere. You may note some interesting, you can see some Indians here, and I think there's one there too. It didn't last long because what we call the Oregonians arrived. They were the settlers that came from the east in the wagons, come to Oregon, and then went down to California. And they had a totally different attitude towards indigenous people. They had a rough time getting across the plains, and they absolutely hated Indians. They didn't understand the conditions in California with very peaceful Indians. So, of course, they started doing very bad things up there, massacres and the revenges, and it was basically the beginning of the Indian Wars. And whatever Indian worked there up there was just gone, got home. New laws in 1850, they basically sanctioned slavery. Any Indian not having proof for employment would be sold as a slave. But it was actually worse, because there are also sections said that they cannot give evidence against a white man. So if someone actually looked down you on the street and said, I could use you, you can go up and say, dude, can I see your papers? And you pick the papers out and you say, what papers? You can't complain. You cannot speak against a white man. So basically, it means that anybody wanted could become a slave. There was also an amendment in 1860 that basically targeted Indian youth and children. There was a lot of domestic workers who were needed for all these people coming in, they're not households. And it was not meant to create a slave market, but it did. So basically the price for these black markets, kidnapping. They would kidnap kids one place and basically sell them another one. And it was hard to figure out what really had happened. But $50 was the going rate for a child. This was basically the beginning of the Indian boarding schools. This is a photo. It's good to see their faces. A 10-year-old. Basically, take care of the kids, just like the blacks in the South. The state-sanctioned extermination, of course, rough. You heard about the Indian Wars. They basically decided the people that settled in Northern California freaked out about being unsafe. The Indians complained that they took their land. And they basically decided that the only way to stop this is to exterminate them all. There's just simply no other way. We didn't know we can coexist. And you can see this is basically the indigenous population through the years. Pretty badly. And I say it's state-sanctioned because there were vigilantes up there, but basically if you ran out some expenses doing your killing, you send a bill to the state and you would get paid. You also would get weapons from the US Army to do what you were doing. And local counties had bounties for scalps or other body parts. But also the state of California also set up a bounty system for Indian scalps. So it was basically state policy. I'll squeeze this great image that actually shows what it was all about for these people that thought this was just the right thing to do. Here we have all the settlers coming from the east with the trains and the telegraph lines and cows and horses, etc. In front of here, you've got Plains Indians fleeing, and all wildlife is fleeing for these people. And they basically thought that was just inevitable. That was how it would be, also called manifest destiny. It was the destiny of the white race in America to basically populate the entire continent. So it's sort of sad they had to die, but it just had to be. This was way superior. So how does a people survive something like this? This is serious stuff. Quite grim. There's no way of doing genocide light. So, of course, this massacres didn't happen right here, but I'm sure that everybody heard about it. So you go into hiding as Mexican. If you're not known in the area, you can say, I'm Mexican, and they do need workers, so okay. So as long as you don't show that you're Indian, it doesn't work. The one I hadn't thought about was, we all know that being a woman in a war zone with some hostility is a very, very dangerous thing. And they figured out the safest thing is to marry one white man who would then protect you against all the other ones. So many women did that to survive. What I did not realize was there's the Federated Indians of the Great and Rancheria, and they basically have 14 clear lines of descent. And basically, most of those go back to women that did exactly that. If they hadn't done that to save themselves and their family, there would be way, way fewer Coast Miwoks around. They basically secured the survival of the people. Years of being invisible. When there was no arrows coming, people started worrying and they started basically forgetting they were ever there. And if they thought about it, they kind of romanticized, they used to dwell here. But on the fringes of white society, the Coast Miwok was still there, usually working on a white man's ranch. And they often, in spite of their condition, managed to pass on some of their traditional culture to their children, often through storytelling. Some did not think it was safe not to tell anybody. It is eventually, right now, present day, a story of resilience. These people were not supposed to make it, but yet they prevailed, and they're still in Marin County. I thought one way of showing is to have this mass of people here. Is this descendants of one line of the people that got the one grand grant from Pali, having basically a family get together? They really did make it. Lucina Vidauri is the person, an activist from Sausalito that you may be hearing more about. There's also the Coast Miwoks Tribal Council, where they're basically people that met each other and made up this group to basically further Miwok culture. And interesting thing that those two groups didn't actually even know they existed. So at the moment in Miwok society, there's actually an excitement of finding each other again. The big splintering is healing. The time passed. It was a land left. There's no way to deny it. So we're back here. We have our feet on the ground again. And this particular plot went through 6 owners since the great land theft. And each of these people were confident that it belonged to them. Money passed. Real estate deals were made. I mean, this is legit. And now our communities own this particular land. Now, if land was a stolen Rembrandt, we will be basically obliged to hand it back to the rightful owners. Now, this is not so easy to do when it's land. It's not just one little piece of thing. You say, here you go. So with a present Marin County population of 265,000 people, where would they go? And all of California, practically all of Canada, is unceded land. It all belonged to someone else. So we did what we said we would do. We would collect information. So what's next? A couple of things came up in our group was and also been recommended once you've done it, you try to get personal contact with the indigenous people that actually do live in your neighborhood. And we are actually happy to have made a contact with a local ceremonial singer, Sky Road. You could arrive there under the Redwoods Talks and have people come and talk on the subjects. We could think through how to write a land statement for our church. We could be like some of you, like you, Betsy. You are part of basically healing the land. It also suffered greatly while the people suffered. Find other ways to keep learning? Big question mark, what will it be? And we're going to try to end up with a healing song, which we actually have had great problems remembering. So we're going to try to sing a song for you that we have learned from Sky Road, who is very honored that we would like to bless our church with this song. You're going to do, and you're also going to get the pitch. So slow first.
Yeah.
Hinakipani, hinakapani, 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 hayamatiebo, avuchebo, hinakapani, hinakapani, avuchebo, hinakapani, hinakapami, 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 avuchebo, 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 hinakapani, avuchebo. One more time. Hinakapami, 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 avuchebo, 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 hinakapami, avuchebo. Oh, and it means put on your abalone shine.
That's what the...
Yeah, and the abalone is very, very sacred to folk Miwoks. Okay. Well, wear that abalone shine, God in the world. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.